what we have in common now around the world is security. And Tom Quiggin is the next speaker. It was great to meet you at the always hospitable Siddiqui residence. He's a court-qualified expert on terrorism and a veteran of 20 years in the intelligence community. He is also the author of a recent book on national security intelligence. He also spent 15 years in military service with time deployed in Bosnia and Croatia in 1999, among other foreign assignments. His recent report, Presence of Muslim Brotherhood in Canada, is a landmark report in terms of studying a major Islamic network in Canada. And the quote that came to me is, you're going to help us fulfill this quote, which is that war is good business for the few, but peace is better business for the many. Thank you.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Pleasure to be here. Minister Kenney, Tahir, thank you for organizing this. Ernest for being the MC, and Salma, of course, for being the power behind the throne that got this all done. I have an unfortunate reputation for speaking clearly and speaking on exactly what I believe. So I'll try and behave today, given that we have members of Parliament and a Minister of the Crown in the room, but I make no promises. My interest in extremism started in Bosnia, where we watched mass killings, mass rapes, beheadings, and other atrocities go right off the scale, all of them committed in the name of communism, in the name of fascism, in the name of democracy, in the name of the Khomeiniist Islamic folks who were there from the Revolutionary Guards Council. So I got a bit of an ear for listening to extremists, and I decided I didn't really like these folks. For those of you who may or may not know, I also testified against Momin Khawaja in court after having participated in his investigation, because I believed he fulfills the classic definition of a terrorist according to the Criminal Code of Canada. Minister Kennedy, you must close your ears just for a couple of minutes. I also testified against the government of Canada in the case of Hassan el-Amri. For much the same reason. I believe that he was genuinely innocent and that secret intelligence and muddled thinking had trapped him in a web where he wound up in jail for 6.5 years. And the federal court eventually agreed with me. Mr. Justice Mosley said that not only was he not an al-Qaeda terrorist, in fact, he never was. Being in the intelligence community and testifying against the government on an intelligence-led case, it's a personal experience. It's quite interesting and not always pleasant. Tahir asked me to come and say, how are we going to solve the jihadist problem in Canada? And then said I've got 8 minutes to do it. No worries. No worries. Just by quick way, the United Arab Emirates just did something interesting. They listed 86 groups as terrorist groups. They listed them as proxies, fronts, fundraisers, weapons suppliers. My understanding of what they're doing is they're attempting to spark an international discussion on a globalist, holistic approach to radicalization, not just the groups they're going after. They also have indicated privately the list is dynamic and it may have more names added to it. We'll see. Also, yesterday, or I believe maybe it was today, ISIS came out and actually said that the attack in Ottawa, the attack in Saint-Jean-sur-Richelieu, was very much a result of their propaganda. And I'd say that's about half true. We'll get back to that. So, what to actually do? Minister, please reopen your ears again now. First thing we can do is challenge the muddle-headed thinking that was on in Canada. It is not isolation that causes extremism. It's ideology. It is not isolation that causes young minds to be rendered vulnerable to this kind of stuff. It's the infrastructure that's been built up in Canada by groups who are looking to create a political space where violence is acceptable. Isolation, when it does occur, is mostly self-imposed. There's a guy in Pickering who's got 10 YouTube videos that are explaining to young Muslims why it's their job to isolate themselves from the mainstream. That's an issue. We also have streams of extremism coming into Canada. A lot of it's driven by the Brotherhood, the Muslim Brotherhood of the Ikhwani. It's driven by Iranian-supported Khomeinists, and it's driven by Saudi-funded Wahhabis. The government should have an inventory of people coming into Canada who bring these extremist values with them. And by extremist, what do I mean? People who say that their beliefs are superior to the Constitution, people who say their beliefs are superior to the Charter of Rights, people who say their beliefs are superior to the Criminal Code of Canada. Wouldn't be that hard to do. Follow the money, follow the ideology, we'll get it. Now, I mentioned ISIS. They said their propaganda is responsible for the attacks in Canada, and I'd say they're half correct. They are the external pull factor. But here in Canada, we have groups who have struggled for years, as I mentioned, to create an atmosphere, to create a political space where extremist thinking, where the idea of killing people is an acceptable means of political engagement. So I would say ISIS is half right. The other half of the problem is here in Canada. By quick example, the City of London. I mean, really, it's a center of extremism. City of London is famous for trees, a river, a bunch of universities, a bunch of hospitals, and oh yeah, for exporting extremists who go around blowing up gas plants in Algeria. How can this happen? Let's think about the city of Calgary, a city that's known for what? Oil, Calgary Stampede, a hockey team that's somewhat more successful than Toronto. It is famous for beef. It's famous for a lot of stuff. But yet Calgary is producing suicide bombers. Calgary is producing ISIS fighters. How can this be happening? I would suggest to you, if we look at the clusters of where the radical and extremist groups are in Canada, and we look at who are the cities doing the exporting of this stuff, we find that it's not a coincidence. What else can we do? Let's look at, and I'm sorry for some people, let's look at the muddle-headed, fuzzy-brained, postmodernist, cultural relativist people who tell us all about that all cultures are equal and we have to respect all cultures. Let's tell them no. Let's tell them that our Canadian culture is good, it's acceptable, and it is superior to some others. Let's tell them that you cannot drown your daughters and your wife in the canal in the name of honor. Let's tell them that female genital mutilation is a barbaric practice from the past that belongs on the dustbin of history. Let us say that advocating wife beating is wrong. Let's tell them that polygamy, contrary to a spokesman in Winnipeg recently, is not here to protect women. Tell the extremists that their belief systems that they place above the Constitution, above the Charter of Rights, and above the Criminal Code aren't really welcome here. So, what do we need to do? Here's the short answer. Take away the money. Quit funding them, for heaven's sakes. Sorry. Take away the charity status for some of these organizations. If you've been busted once for funding terrorism, you shouldn't be allowed to run another charity that's doing the same thing. If you were on that board of directors, you shouldn't be allowed to be on another one. Expose them, educate them, challenge them. When we have groups that say, oh, we represent all Canadian Muslims, let's say, okay, who funds you? What's your membership list look like? What money are you getting from foreign countries and foreign powers? And what gives you the right to speak on behalf of all Muslims? Any more than there's anybody who can speak on behalf of all Christians, all Jews, or all anything else. When we see people who advocate that al-Madudi represents the finest form of tasfir of Islam, let us stand up and say, no, we don't believe that here in Canada. Al-Madudi is not the finest form of tasfir. Arguably, he might be one of the worst. When we see people who say Hassan al-Banna represents the purest form of Islam in the modern age, well, over there, not over here, sorry. When we see groups who say Syed Qutb, who advocated violence as a means of problem solving, is the guy we should follow, maybe we should look at them and say, sorry, we don't want you here. So, one quick last thought. What are the things that extremists are afraid of in Canada? What are they afraid of, generally speaking? Well, they're afraid of educated women. For instance, a woman flying an F-16 for the United Arab Emirates. There's a hell of a shock to a few folks. They're afraid of open debate. So engage them, debate them, invite them, and say, hey, how do you defend yourself? They're afraid of free speech. So let's advocate free speech and use it. It's actually a good thing. Let's take away the free support they're getting from taxpayer-funded charities, etc., etc. It scares them. Terrorism and extremism, at the end of the day, are about one thing. The weapon of terrorism is not the gun, it's not the bomb, it's not genocide, it's not any of that stuff. The weapon of terrorism is fear. The intent of terrorists is to change your society through fear. The intent of extremists is to undermine your society so they can use that fear to force you. So here's an idea. Don't be afraid. Get out there and challenge them. Thank you.
Thanks, Tom. Why don't you say what you really thought, though? That was pretty cool. Isn't this a great afternoon? I mean, it's just the education and the compassion is very inspiring.